Your neighbor just wrote a check for $22,000. He called it an investment. The solar company called it energy independence. The utility company called it their favorite day of the year. And 3 counties away, a man named Thomas has not written a single check to a power company in 47 years. His setup cost him less than a used lawnmower. It fits in the back of a pickup truck. And he built it on a Sunday afternoon while his kids were playing in the yard. Something went very wrong between his story and your neighbor's story. And in the next few minutes, you are going to find out exactly what it was. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is not a homesteading fantasy or a survivalist rabbit hole. It is a documented, working approach to solar energy that was quietly practiced across rural Pennsylvania and Ohio for 5 decades, while the rest of America was being steered towards something far more expensive and far less effective. By the end of this video, you will know why the $20,000 rooftop system was never designed to free you from the power company. You will know exactly what the alternative looks like, what it costs, and how you can start building it this weekend without touching a single wire inside your house. Stay with me, because the part that should make you genuinely angry comes about halfway through, and the part that should make you relieved comes right after that. Let me tell you how I ended up standing in a barn in rural Ohio at 7 in the morning, staring at a battery the size of a carry-on suitcase and trying to figure out how it was powering an entire woodworking shop. I had spent the previous 3 years on the other side of the story. I had done everything correctly. I researched. I compared quotes. I hired a licensed installer. I signed a financing agreement for a rooftop system that the salesman described, with genuine enthusiasm, as the last energy decision I would ever have to make. 14 months later, I was on the phone with the utility company asking why my bill had not disappeared. The representative explained it to me using the word offset. Not eliminated, not replaced. Offset. The system I had paid for was not designed to remove me from the grid. It was designed to reduce my dependence on the grid, while keeping me permanently attached to it. The difference between those two things is worth roughly $19,000. That phone call was the beginning of a very long education. The workshop I visited belonged to a man I will call Daniel. He runs a furniture operation out of a property that has never had a utility meter installed on it. Not because he cannot afford one. Because he decided, before his sons were born, that he was not going to build his family's livelihood around a monthly invoice from a company he had no relationship with and no leverage over. His solar setup, which he assembled himself using components he ordered from 2 suppliers, and a wiring approach that had been passed around his community since the early 1980s, cost him at the time just under $400. In today's money, with modern components that are roughly 90% cheaper per watt than they were then, you could replicate what Daniel built for somewhere between $250 and $320. I walked around that workshop for 20 minutes before I stopped being confused and started being educated. There was no inverter the size of a filing cabinet. There was no monitoring system. There was no app on anyone's phone tracking production curves. There was a panel, a battery, a direct connection to the tools and lights that needed power. That was the whole system. And it worked. Here's what happened to simple solar in America. And I want you to follow this timeline carefully because the details matter. In the late 1970s, residential solar existed in 2 forms. The first form was grid connected, expensive, complex, dependent on utility cooperation. The second form was standalone, simple, affordable, owned entirely by the homeowner. In 1978, federal legislation created the legal structure for net metering. On paper, it looked like a gift to homeowners. In practice, it created a single approved pathway for residential solar, and that pathway ran directly through the utility company's billing system. Over the following 2 decades, standalone solar did not disappear. It was simply made culturally invisible. State energy programs promoted grid-tied systems. Lenders financed grid-tied systems. Building codes were written around grid-tied systems. The entire infrastructure of advice, financing, and installation that grew up around residential solar was built to serve one model. And that model required you to remain a utility customer for the life of your system. The communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, never participated in any of that. They were not contrarian. They were not making a political statement. They simply evaluated the available options and chose the one that gave them the most control over the most critical resource their families depended on. 1 panel, 1 battery, 1 load. No contract required. Let me give you the exact components, because this is where most people expect a catch, and there is no catch. You need 1 100-watt solar panel. Current retail price, approximately $70 to $80. You'll need 1 100 ampere lithium iron phosphate battery. Current retail price, approximately $130 to $160. You need a 30 amp charge controller to manage the flow between panel and battery. Current retail price, around $25. You need a small, pure, sine wave inverter rated for 400 watts. Current retail price, approximately $35 to $45. Total investment, right around $300 give or take based on where you shop. Now here is the installation. You position the panel against the south-facing exterior wall of your home, not on the roof, against the wall, leaning, if necessary. You run a low-voltage wire through a window gap or a dryer vent. You connect the panel to the charge controller to the battery to the inverter. You plug your appliance into the inverter. You are done. No permit required, because you have not touched your home's existing electrical system. No inspector required, because nothing is connected to the grid. No installer required, because the entire assembly takes less than 2 hours with a screwdriver and basic wire connectors. The appliance is now running on its own completely independent circuit, powered entirely by sunlight, managed entirely by you. The single best first application of this system is not the one most people guess. It is not light-in. It is not phone charging. It is a chest freezer. Here is why. A standard chest freezer draws between 200 and 280 kilowatt-hours per year. At average US electricity rates, that is somewhere between $50 and $70 annually, every year, for as long as you own the freezer. But more importantly, a chest freezer is one of the most forgiving loads in your home. It does not need continuous power. It cycles on, cools its contents, and cycles off. A well-insulated chest freezer with a full load inside can maintain safe temperatures for 30 to 36 hours, without any power input at all. That means even on cloudy days, even in winter, your battery has enough time to recover between the freezer's power cycles. The math works comfortably, and the moment you plug that freezer into your own dedicated solar circuit, something shifts in how you think about your house. You stop thinking about your electricity bill as one single number that arrives every month. You start thinking about it as a collection of individual loads, each one of which is a candidate for its own independent circuit. The garage refrigerator, the basement dehumidifier, the outdoor lighting, the workshop bench, the well pump on a rural property. Each one of these is a separate opportunity. Each one can be addressed one at a time, on its own timeline, for its own $300 investment. Now we get to the part I saved for this moment, because it is the detail that took me the longest to understand, and the one that makes the biggest difference in how long your system actually lasts. The approach used across Amish communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio does not use a single battery to power multiple appliances. It uses a dedicated battery for each significant load. One battery for the chest freezer, a separate battery for the workshop, a separate battery for outdoor lighting, a separate battery for the water pump. When I first heard this, my instinct was that it sounded wasteful. Why buy 4 batteries when one larger battery could serve all 4 loads? Here is why. When a single battery serves multiple loads with different usage patterns, it experiences what engineers call irregular depth of discharge. Some loads draw heavily in the morning, others draw at night, others are unpredictable. The battery is constantly cycling in ways it was not optimized for, and the result is accelerated where, when a battery serves a single predictable load, something different happens. The discharge pattern becomes consistent. The recovery window becomes predictable. The battery operates within the range it was designed for, day after day, without stress spikes. The practical result is that batteries in dedicated single-load configurations routinely last 15 to 20 years. Standard home battery systems, sold through installers, are warranted for 10 years and frequently require replacement at 7. That difference in lifespan, multiplied across every load in your house, is worth thousands of dollars over time. And the implementation is simple. When you want to add a second load, you add a second battery. You spend an additional $100 to $120. You gain a completely independent circuit with its own dedicated power source. Your system grows one organ at a time. Each organ is self-contained. When one has a problem, the others keep running without interruption. That is resilience. Not the word as it appears on a solar company's marketing brochure. The actual thing. There is one more detail, and it is the kind of thing that sounds small until you experience the first winter with a solar system and realize it is not small at all. The standard installer advice is to mount panels at an angle equal to your geographic latitude, facing true south, to maximize annual energy production. That advice optimizes for the average day across the full year. The approach used in rural Amish communities optimizes for something different. It optimizes for the worst day. Panels tilted closer to 70 degrees, approaching vertical in winter months. Collect sunlight more efficiently at low sun angles. They shed snow automatically without anyone climbing on a roof. They underperform in summer. When you have abundant sunlight you do not need, in exchange for stronger performance in December and January, when sunlight is scarce and your battery needs every watt it can get. No installer will ever recommend this to you, because the kilowatt-hour production number it generates on paper is lower than the number they put on their proposal, and that number is what they use to justify the price. But if your goal is energy security rather than a production statistic, optimizing for December is the only rational choice. 50 winters of practical experience arrived at that conclusion before any software model did. I want to say something directly before we get to the end of this video. This is not an anti-technology argument. The communities that developed and refined this approach are not people who reject useful tools. They are people who apply a specific filter to every tool before they adopt it. The filter is simple. Does this tool serve my family, or does it make my family serve the tool? A panel that charges a battery that runs a freezer serves your family. A $22,000 finance system connected to a net metering agreement that was written by lawyers you have never met. Administered by a utility company you cannot negotiate with. Optimized to benefit every party in the transaction except you. That is the tool your family serves. The physical technology in both cases is nearly identical. What is different is the financial structure built around it. One structure puts control in your hands. The other structure puts your roof, your sunlight, and your monthly payment in someone else's hands, and calls it progress. The families who figured this out did not have access to special information. They had access to a different set of priorities. And those priorities led them, over 5 decades of trial and error, to a system that is simpler, cheaper, more resilient, and more genuinely independent than anything being sold through a licensed installer today. You can start building that system this weekend. $300. One afternoon. One appliance off the grid permanently. That is where it begins. Before you go, I want to ask you one specific question, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments below. Which appliance in your home would you put on its own dedicated solar circuit first? The chest freezer, the garage refrigerator, the workshop, the well pump, or something else entirely? Be specific. Tell me the appliance and tell me why. Because the next video I am building walks through 3 complete dedicated circuit builds, wire gauges, battery sizing, panel positioning, the full process for each one. And the appliances you mention in the comments are going to directly shape which 3 I choose to cover first. If you found this useful, the subscribe button is right below this video. You are not joining a channel. You are joining a conversation that a lot of people are quietly having about recovering practical knowledge that got buried a long time ago. Next week, I am covering something that works on the same principle as everything we discussed today, but applied to water. Specifically, a rainwater collection and gravity filtration approach that predates municipal water systems, outperforms them in several measurable ways, and can be built on most residential properties for under $200. The documentation on it goes back further than you would expect. Until then, find the south-facing wall, lean the panel against it, plug something in. Start the process of becoming the person in your neighborhood who figured it out first.